Hey everybody, what's up? We have put together a tier list finally. We've talked about it a little bit, and I finally decided to dedicate the time to it. So this is my first draft of a tier list for the game, and I don't know that I think this is the best way to do it, but it's the best way I can come up with to do in a reasonable amount of time. So we'll go through and talk about the way it's set up and why it's set up the way that it is. And then we will go through and just discuss a little bit about why everyone is where they are. And yeah, I'm sure this will get adjusted over time as I do more testing and the game develops more. But I think for the game in its current state, at least from my experience, this feels pretty accurate. So again, this is just my opinion based on my own testing. For the most part, I do incorporate some other opinions here and there based on champs that I have limited experience with. But again, this is just my opinion, so if you disagree, that's fine. Don't feed champs over this or anything. This is just kind of something that's fun to do and perhaps a point of reference for newer players or players who are just looking for something to look at very quickly and get an idea of roughly where a champ falls in the game based on the opinion of one, pretty experienced player at this point. So I know Dan Heilman also has his own tier list that he does, so it's probably worth going and checking that out as well, because he's also another very high level player. And I imagine we disagree on a couple of things, so it's not a bad idea to get multiple perspectives and to put into your own work and opinion and come out where you come out. So anyway, I feel like that's all the disclaimers we need. Let's talk about the way that it's set up and why. Actually, I think I wanted to drag him over here a little bit. So I've got tanks in the first row, and then I've got the two DPS together, but also in their own category. I've got AoE and single target. Then if we come over here, we've got support / other, and then healers in their own category. I feel like those need to be separated a little bit. And you'll notice some champs are kind of on the line between two categories, and that's why I've done my best to butt up categories that sometimes champs will fill multiple roles. So like Masrani, for example, he is on the line of support and healer, but still very high as well into the S tier. I don't think he's as good of a healer as Serena, but I think he's better support than anyone else. And the fact that he's also such a strong healer has him very high between both categories. So again, there's probably a better table to use for that kind of method, and it's hard to make it apply across the board. But again, I'm not trying to spend days putting this thing together either, so I do have other stuff to do. So I'll explain where necessary, where I feel like it's necessary for stuff like that. So let's start with the tanks. S tier, A tier, B tier, C tier, and F tier. I feel like it's probably enough tiers to get a pretty good idea of how they all measure up against each other. So Leo's obviously at the top of the list. Leo's just insane. He's kind of broken the arena right now. You're going to be hard pressed to find a high ranking arena team that's not using Leo, and you're going to be hard pressed to beat a high ranking arena team that isn't using Leo, or without using Leo, I should say. He is just kind of ridiculous in all areas of the game. You're going to push further literally everywhere in the game if you have him. He makes a lot more possible in Twilight. He's great in, everything. Leo's just insane. And I've slid him over a little bit because he's also pretty decent damage. So that's kind of why he's over there. But again, take that gradient thing with a grain of salt. It doesn't really apply all down here. Just in certain cases where I thought it was particularly apt is where I exercised that. So it's not a gradient all the way across the board, but Leo's over here just because he's also kind of decent damage given the circumstance. Crate, still very high in the S tier. I just can't put him on par with Leo anymore. Before Leo, he was the best by a pretty large margin. But again, with Leo in the game, Leo's just kind of stupid. Let's be honest about it. Leo's a little bit stupid, okay? So Crete still the best otherwise, but Leo above. Some people are probably not going to like this one very much, but I think Artis is the next best. He's still quite a ways down. I don't have him in the S tier. He begins the A tier. Artis is just a lot better than people want to give him credit for. Artis was my solo tank for a long time during my progression. He tanked for me in my DISA team. He tanked for me for a long time in my Terra teams. He just enables you to do a lot more with the rest of your account before you get your Crete and before you get these other champs. He can just sit up front and do it alone for a pretty long time. And then for a longer time, Crete and Artis were my front line. And I got very, very far in the game with that. In PvE, you are going to outgrow him, but it takes a while. It takes a lot longer than people say. I used to see comments that say, like, at stage 20, Artis is going to fall off. I was using Artis well into stage 30s, well into the mid and high 30s, okay? Artis is really, really good. He's a great boss debuffer, so he's going to be really good for DISA and certain guild hunts for your Ancient Altar single target. His debuff that he brings for boss fights is fantastic. And then now I've re-geared him in Gluttony with damage for my DISA Caves team, and I think I'm doing like 20-second DISA runs right now. He's still on that team, so that's probably going to be kind of controversial depending on who you ask. As far as I'm concerned, he's a no-brainer for the A tier. I think if I'm looking at this list and I'm having to choose who my front line's going to be, it's Leo and then Crete and then Artis, and it's not really super close beyond that. As a matter of fact, these two can probably come down a little bit, honestly. So from there, we've got Boar. I do think Boar stands out for the rest of the tanks just because of what he's capable of in arena and decent. He's usable in PvE, but the problem with the tank class, and we've talked about this in the past, is that there's just not a lot of room for the tank class in the game right now because Vanguards just outshine them so heavily. There's really no reason to use a tank instead of one of the Vanguards. So the tanks are in kind of a tough position right now. But I think of the tanks, Boar is probably the best one. It's up for debate, and perhaps when I do a bit more testing, we'll rearrange this a little bit. But for now, I think Boar stands atop the rest of the tanks. Oisa, I think, gets slept on a lot. I kind of slept on Oisa for a little bit too. Oisa is capable of some pretty great things, and I'm excited to get her to Immortal and Beyond so I can really start to test her in some higher level arena. But I think she's going to be an interesting way to deal with some of the problems in arena right now. And again, with her stun and stuff that she brings, she's pretty decent for some PvE stuff as well, right? She can help you out in Twilight and maybe certain chapter stages. And the fact that she's so accessible. Same thing with Artis. The fact that Artis is just so accessible and so effective, I think gives them a pretty good ranking. That's why I have Oisa up here so high, which again might be kind of a strange pick to some. But I think Oisa is really, really good. Zeta, I haven't gotten to do as much testing as I would like to do with Zeta, but I have seen Zeta in action on other servers, in servers that are more advanced than ours, like the Asia servers have been going for quite a bit longer. Zeta's fantastic. Zeta's a killer tank. And I think she could probably get herself a little bit higher on this list, but again, I have to get more copies of her and do my own testing. I can only rank her so high based on what I've heard, you know what I mean, or what I've seen other people do without knowing all the details. So I think Zeta has a lot of potential, so I'm leaving her here for now. But and she's kind of an exception to the rule, one of the exceptions where I haven't done a lot of extensive testing myself, but I know that she's very good. So she's ranked high. My nose is so itchy right now. I'm trying real hard to not keep touching my nose, but good grief. It's ridiculous. All right. Next, we've got Oak. For a long time, I thought Oak was probably the best of the three like standout tanks. We have Boar, Oak, and Hercules. But over time, just my own testing and seeing things happen, I think Boar kind of outshines Oak substantially. Oak has some great mechanics, and I think Oak is great. But given the current state of the game, as we've talked about with tanks, and being that there's just not really much of a place for him, it's hard to rank him high because, again, there's just not really much of a place for him right now. Same goes for Hercules. I like Hercules. I invested heavily in Hercules and used him for a while. But you hit a certain point kind of early on where you realize you just don't need him. You can throw Artis up front by himself and be fine and kind of do more than you could do with Hercules up front, even with some help. You know what I mean? So, again, kind of a bummer because I think as far as, like on paper, I think they're very cool. I think they have very cool mechanics. I think they seem very usable. Again, they've just kind of positioned themselves in a place where Vanguards, there's just no reason not to use Vanguards over tanks. Quite, I think is very interesting. He's one that I am kind of exercising the gradient a little bit and sliding him a little bit more over to the damage side because I think he's more of an offensive tank. The first thing he does when he gets his ult is dive into the enemy's backline. So I think you kind of have to use him very specifically. He can be used very specifically to counter. You know, when Ravenna was kind of a problem to deal with, you can have Kuwait dive in and focus Ravenna's attention away from the team. You could use him very specifically to counter certain things like that. So I think that he's very usable, but you can't take him everywhere. He's not going to be your tank everywhere. And I think for that reason, he kind of has to get dragged down a little bit below the other tanks, maybe a little bit further even. Maybe that's a little bit more reasonable. Because again, you just have to use him so specifically, and he's not really much of a tank in the traditional sense, you know what I'm saying? Nafang has to be in the game a little bit longer. He's still pretty new as of making this, and I have not done extensive testing with him yet. I have done a bit of testing with him, and when you look at his kit, he's interesting, but it seems very clear that his whole purpose is just buffing Leo. He picks the Vanguard with the highest attack. That's Leo. No matter which way you mix it up, you're not putting attack on any other Vanguard. So it seems like he was made with the sole purpose of buffing Leo, which is strange because Leo doesn't really need any more help. Leo's already a big enough problem, so it's kind of interesting that they decided to put this dude in the game with kind of the sole purpose of buffing Leo, but there you go. It's not that the rest of his kit isn't good and that he's not usable, but I don't think that he is... I just don't think he's as usable across the board. He fits a little bit into the Vanguard meta that's going on right now. You know, you see a lot of teams in Arena where it's Masrani and 4 Vanguards. So in that sense, he's usable. But once that gets sorted, once we're no longer in that meta, I just don't know where his place is going to be. So again, maybe we just need to do more testing. Maybe I haven't used him enough yet. I do intend to use him more. We're still in the Rise of Heroes event. I am going to get more copies of him and get him to Immortal and really exercise his utility. But right now, I just don't see much. There's no reason I'm going to use him over Crete or Artis. I'm definitely not going to use him over Leo. And I'm really only going to use him if I'm using Leo. And I've tested him on teams with Leo versus not using him on teams with Leo. And he doesn't make a big enough difference in Leo's damage to justify me giving him that spot where I could be giving it to someone else who's bringing heavier crowd control or outputting more damage or healing. You know what I mean? There's I don't know. If I want to buff Leo, I'll bring Rez. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I don't think he earns a spot on the team in the same way that some other champs do. So well, again, I could be wrong. We'll see. I haven't played with him a ton, but that's kind of my vibe on him right now. And then Langale, poor Langale, man. I want Langale to be good so bad. I guess partially because I love elephants so much, and 2, just because I hate it when there's a worse champ in a category. My heart always wants them to be good. You know, I struggle with that in Raid for a long time too. I still want War Chief to be amazing, and it just, you know, I guess it's just never gonna happen. But my heart always does go out to the worst in a category, and that just is Langale, man. He just doesn't really have a place in a. It's unfortunate because he doesn't really have a place where his class already doesn't really have a place. So he's real disconnected right now. He really just doesn't have much to offer. So it is what it is. Maybe that'll change someday. And then Guan Yu is down here behind me. You see he's grayed out. He's the only champ I don't have. None of us have him, at least on the newer servers. And he's not down here because I think he's an F. He's just down here because it's inconclusive. I've got a few champs down here that it's just inconclusive. I haven't seen enough or tested enough. I would venture to say that Guan Yu is probably going to fall somewhere high in the high A tier, maybe above Artis even. Maybe Artis slides down a little bit to make room for Guan Yu at the top of the A tier, but it's hard to know for sure. He was the first Triple S I pulled on my account on the Asia server before the game actually launched. So I did get a little bit of playtime with him, and he caught a lot of hate then, but I really liked him. I thought he was really good. So I don't know. I'll have to wait and see. Hopefully we get a banner for him soon. I've noticed we've repeated banners a couple of times and still not had a Guan Yu banner, so I'm not real sure what's going on with that, but hopefully soon we get him. So that's my thoughts on all the tanks. Let's move on over now to the DPS class and get started with AoE. Now, Ravenna is Queen AoE, and I don't really think that's debatable. I think some people might want to make a case for Luke, and I have messed around with Luke a little bit on some other accounts. I've seen a lot of Luke. I think Luke is great, and I think Luke belongs high S tier, but he just doesn't do what Ravenna does, and he just doesn't. So, in my opinion, Ravenna is Queen AoE. I don't think anyone else touches her. I think Luke is the closest, but I think she's, and we could probably even justify that, honestly, just pull him down just a little bit more. Ravenna is bonkers AoE damage. So she's at the top, then relatively closely followed by Luke. Luke is fantastic. I'm not trying to shit on Luke or anything. He's just not Ravenna. Next in line, we have Falvia. Now, she's one that is a little bit harder to obtain, but when you get her and get her built, holy cow, man, she can put out some damage. So it's kind of tough because I do try to factor in availability a little bit in this, but I don't really want it to be too heavily influenced by that. So maybe you could drag her down a little bit further because she's a little bit harder to get. But honestly, once you get through that first 30 days and you start getting those frags that you can use on any champ, you'll probably have a couple copies of her by then anyway. And then you can start using frags to flare in and the hero selection cards that you'll get from certain rewards. It'll start to ramp up and you'll get her built and you'll find out. She is fantastic. She is a very, very solid, AoE champ. So I've done a video on her. I'll try to link videos below this video in the description of any champs that I've done a specific guide on. So if you want to go check out more details about that particular champ, and then I'll probably do more. I plan on doing a video on every champ in the game at some point, honestly. So they'll be there, but I'll link a couple of the more important ones down below this video, okay? Next, we've got Omar. Omar's just, again, very solid and very accessible. You're going to have Omar very early on. They make a few copies of him available pretty early on, and he's great. He's going to do a lot for you in the Kansaro Marsh. He's going to be decent for you in PvE progress in general for a little bit. You're going to get to a point where you can't really use him anymore. There's going to be a handful of champs you're kind of going to be forced to use when you start to get really high in the story. But for a decent amount of time, Omar's going to be decent AoE. He's usable in Arena for a little bit until you start to get up in the higher ranks, maybe like top 200 or so, where you're going to start to see the meta really shine. Maybe top 150, 100, somewhere around there. But, he's usable. Solid AoE damage. Can probably be a staple in your final Kansaro Marsh team. You know what I mean? Not really too difficult to build. Just solid. Solid, higher A tier damage, I think. I think that's a pretty reasonable spot for him. Next up, we've got Kane. I kind of struggle with where to put Kane because Kane can pump out some damage too. But his AoE damage is kind of interesting. It's not the same kind of AoE damage that is traditional because he's got like bombs that bounce around and he does it a little bit in a little bit of a weirder way. I do want him a little bit higher. Maybe I want him a little bit closer. Do I think he's better than Omar? I think maybe let's kind of reverse their position. I do think Kane is better than Omar, if I'm going to be honest about it. Again, I just finished this before I started the video, so we may make a few more adjustments as we go. I think Kane's probably better than Omar. Based on my experience, and you see I've got Omar hyper evolved and I've got Kane at Immortal 3. I've got some experience with these dudes. I've done a video on Kane as well. I think Kane's probably better than Omar. I do have him a little bit further over to single target because again, his AoE is just a little bit different, whereas Falvia just drops AoE. Their damage was comparable when I tested them, but I think Falvia gets the edge. I think she kind of bleeds into S tier, whereas Kane is like high A tier. I think that's probably pretty fair. And then moving down the line, we've got Ornn down here at like a low B, low to mid B. Ornn is fine. Ornn is one that I tried to make good. I did some testing with Ornn, and he's cool. Ornn might be a she. Is Ornn the one that's a she? One of these robots has a. The game calls one of them a she in their skill description. I can't remember. Either way, Ornn is just not the rest of the champs in this category, unfortunately. You know what I mean? Still usable. You could do some things with Ornn when you need the energy bond in Twilight and you're out of your main champs. Ornn can fill in. When we have an AoE event, Ornn is decent, but Ornn is just not going to be your choice over anyone else. Okay. As far as Moriami and Pregor, it's just inconclusive, but I figured I would put them on the list because what I do know about them is that if you have them together, they are fantastic. They make a fantastic duo, but I think that kind of hurts both of their rankings. So I've kind of stuck them together and I've ranked them low because again, one, they're just very difficult to come by. And two, it's my understanding anyway, you need one for the other to shine. It's hard to put one in a team and have them perform better than other options. So still better than Ornn, but I can't justify putting them up here in this crowd yet because don't know enough about them. Maybe when we get more testing, we'll be able to give them a better spot. And then Paluno, Xander, and Murphy Rowe, I just haven't done enough with yet. Honestly, I haven't gotten around to playing with. I do have them at a point where I could, so we're probably going to do that soon. But as of right now, I've just kind of dragged them down to the inconclusive area because don't know. Nagrama, I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of Nagrama. Nagrama kind of gets classified as an AoE champ, but I feel like Nagrama is more of a single target DPS champ because the enemies got to line themselves up in a pretty specific way for Nagrama to do good AoE damage. So I think he's more single target, but still very good damage output. Do I think he's better than Kane? No, I don't think I do. I don't think I do yet. Perhaps that could change. Possible that could change. But I think that's a pretty decent spot right now for Nagrama. I don't really classify Nagrama as an AoE damage champ, though. Technically, he is, but I feel like he's more... I use him more as a single target. Daniel's a tough one to place here because he's got good AoE damage, single target damage, and support. So I almost wanted to like drag his picture super wide across the board here. He's definitely belongs in the S tier across these three. He's just a crazy good champ. So I don't think he's doing AoE damage that rivals Luke or Ravenna. I don't think he's doing single target damage that rivals Bailey or Emma. Perhaps he needs to come a little bit lower then, because I don't know that I think he's doing single target damage that rivals Taylor either. So maybe it's something like this. I think that might be a little bit better. And then support. But if this was like an overall usage tier list, Daniel's probably going to be in the top 5. If I'm doing a tier list regardless of their usage, their specific utility, and just like how good is this champ, he's probably in the top 5 champs in the game. Okay, so I don't want the fact that there's champs above him in all these categories to make you think I don't think he's one of the top dogs. But I'm trying to do this based on kind of what you're going to be using them for. So I think that I think the fact that his utility gets spread across 3 categories says a lot. He's definitely worth prioritizing over a lot of other champs. I feel like I need to do like a little bit of maintenance here. Maybe Bailey comes up like a little bit more. I think Bailey. Maybe something more like that. And then Daniel can come up a little bit more because I don't like having him lower like that. So just know that Daniel across these 3 categories is fantastic, okay? Killer champ. I just don't really know exactly where to put him because, again, he covers all 3 of these pretty well. Honestly, he covers AoE and support better than single target. But he can pump out some single target damage too. So, you know what I mean? He's just a beast. So that's my spiel about Daniel. Let's move over into the single target champs here. We've got Emma. In the same way that I kind of think Ravenna is queen AoE, I think Emma's queen single target. I mean, it's really hard to get around it. She's just stupid with how much damage she can put out single target. There was a time earlier in the game where I kind of felt like Taylor might outshine, but that's just not the case. Taylor is crazy good for sure, but Emma is just on a completely different level than every other single target champ in the game. And she also functions really well, whereas like if her ult kills someone, she'll shift over and pump the rest of her ult into someone else. So she can mow down enemies with her single target attacks. It's kind of crazy. So I put them on the same level in their respective field, basically, all right? Next in line, we've got Bailey. We all know what's going on with Bailey, okay? Bailey is, again, just going to evolve your account to new levels. He's almost mandatory if you're going to do speedier runs in Terradome. He's fantastic in Altar. He's great in Twilight Lands. He's obviously great in Arena. He was the king of Arena before Leo showed up, so, and he's still very valuable in Arena. He's great in Story. He's great in Soul Mine. Every single place in the game, Bailey's good. And then up slightly under him, maybe a little bit more, is Taylor. Taylor's single target damage for not being a Triple S champ is unreal. And if you want to manual him, you can use him in everywhere, especially when you're progressing. I used him in Disa, Kinsaro, and Terradome when I was progressing through the game. He is responsible for my fastest Terradome run, which as of right now is 1 minute and 8 seconds. But you have to manual him for that. He's, again, obviously going to be very good for the single target boss in Ancient Altar. He's great when you need multi-hits. He's great when you need big single target damage. I've seen him used effectively in Arena here and there. I've lost to teams in the top 10, top 20 that are rocking a Taylor unexpectedly. He's real good, man. He will fall off as far as PvE progression goes, but it'll take a while. And that's just, again, kind of the nature of like the storyline. You're just kind of gonna get forced into using a certain handful of champs, and Taylor's just not one of those champs, but I don't think that really takes anything away from him. He's if we're just talking single target damage, he's among the best. I think he really only gets outshined by Emma and Bailey, and getting outshined by Bailey could depend on where we're talking, you know what I mean? So he belongs up here with the big dogs for sure. I think he's the only non-Triple S champ that like really is a staple, other than Serena when we get to the healers. That's like a staple in the S category. Falvia, I've got just slightly bleeding into the S tier, but Taylor's like up there. He that's his S tier. You know what I mean? So pretty. No, don't move. Don't do that. Here. All right. So as for the rest of it, I've got Bot Mark 2 here on the line because as single target damage goes, he's not one of the best, but he does decent damage. He's probably like a low A, maybe, on his own damage, but the support that he brings kind of ramps him back up in a way where I feel like he still belongs in the S tier because he brings that ability that lets your team do more damage. So as long as you've got the crit rate on him, I've done a video covering him as well, and I talked about him in a recent Terradome video where he's not doing any damage, but he could sit outside the ring, and just with the effects that he brings, when he's landing crits and allowing your team to do more damage, he can still speed your run up very heavily. So I think for that level of support, I have to bleed him back up into the S tier, but he toes the line. He's not an S tier single target damage dealer, but combine his damage and that support that he brings that allows the rest of the team to do what they do. I think between the two, he belongs in the S tier conversation. Okay, so that's why he's there. And then Skewer and Hattie, I have slightly under him because Skewer and Hattie bring some great buffs to the team and can also pump out a lot of damage. I've slid Skewer and Hattie almost completely into the DPS category because I think still their damage is mostly their appeal, but the buffs they bring are definitely effective and important. So I've kind of got them over there on that side as well. And I think they belong in the S tier. Skewer and Hattie are pretty fantastic. Next up, we've got Sinway, who I've talked a lot about Sinway. Again, I've done a standalone video on Sinway, and I've showcased Sinway and a few other things that I've done. Pumps out some crazy damage. So I think probably, other than Skewer and Hattie, as far as damage output alone goes, I think Sinway's the strongest summoner. I have not been able to get another summoner do the damage that Sinway does. Sinway just is crazy. So I've got Sinway slightly in the S tier, okay? Sorietta, I really like. I think it might... No, Sorietta's good there. I think Sorietta's good there. Sorietta is a very accessible champ and very solid, very reliable damage with some really cool effects that Sorietta brings to the battle. So I think that's pretty reasonable. Muka, I've noticed has been getting a little bit of hate in my comments occasionally lately, which I'm not understanding why. Muka's a great champ. Muka is also on my Terradome team that can do it pretty fast. And Muka can, again, be very good in Ancient Altar, but can solve some problems. You kind of have to build around. You need the Ampu Surveilly thing, but Muka has some kind of specific uses that can be very effective in high-level arena, but then just in general, bringing a lot of extra targets to the fight. I think Muka's fantastic and can pump out some damage, especially if you put a Gluttony set on Muka. That's what I'm running mine, and I have zero complaints out of Muka. I think Muka's fantastic, so I'm going like mid-A tier on Muka for single target damage. You can maybe argue, depending on how the Wolves focus, that it could be AoE damage, but we're leaning more single target damage for Muka, okay? Next up, we've got Randall. I'm wondering if I've got Randall a little bit too high. I think I do. Let's bring Randall down a little bit, because I'm looking at Randall against Kalaza, and I'm thinking I don't think Randall belongs above Kalaza. So let's do something like that. I think that's probably a little bit more reasonable. I think Kalaza is also very solid. I just can't get Kalaza to do what Sinway does. And in my experience anyway, Muka outshines Kalaza. So that's why I have Muka above. But Kalaza's still real dope. Still very usable, okay? And then we'll say Randall's next. I think Randall and Rakana are very close to equal. But again, just based on my personal experience, I feel like I get a little bit more out of Randall. One, I feel like Randall stays alive a little bit better than Rakana. Rakana seems like Rakana can't wait to die, in my experience. Whereas Randall will stay alive a little bit. I've done most of this testing in Terradome. And again, I just feel like every time I try to take Rakana in there for anything, Rakana goes down. And Randall goes down less frequently. Randall still goes down often, but not as frequently as Rakana. And I tend to get a little bit more damage out of Randall if they both survive. I feel like Randall tends to outshine Rakana a little bit, but not much. If you liked Rakana better, you could certainly achieve the same things with Rakana over Randall, all right? And then Karma, again, kind of same thing with Lane Gale. It's just real hard to make a case for Karma. I've tried to make a case for Karma. I really wanted Karma to shine. When I made my free-to-play, I was going to try to make Karma one of my main champs, and that just didn't last very long. I just can't get Karma rolling like I can the other champs. So maybe someday that'll change, but for now, that's where we're at. And then Azina and Nautilus, inconclusive. I know some people like Azina a lot and are doing some big things with Azina. I haven't seen much of it, and I have no experience of my own with Azina, really. So same with Nautilus. I have high hopes for Nautilus. I think there's a lot of potential with Nautilus, but I don't have any actual testing yet. I've decided that when I get those frags where I can select, or sometimes you get the selection cards that have like 3 triple S. Anytime Nautilus is in there, unless it's, you know, Ravenna or something, I'm gonna go Nautilus and try to get Nautilus built up because I am very interested in doing some testing. But for now, inconclusive. Moving over into the support. Let's slide this over too so we can get both of these categories on the screen. Really? That's what you give me? It's real annoying. All right, so in the support category, we have, starting up here, we've got Ampu. Ampu is a tough one to place, again, because mostly support. Can do some okay damage. You can get some decent damage out of Ampu, but definitely more support. And I think kind of unrivaled if we're talking about the crowd control type of support that Ampu's bringing. I just think unrivaled, at least at this current state, at least based on what I've been able to see. I have heard that Anaruta is insane. However, you have to have Anaruta up to Immortal with EX30 and some very solid gear before that happens. I think before that happens, Anaruta, I have heard anyway, is not super usable. You need that EX30. Whereas with Ampu, it's nice. I'm 1 away from having his EX30. I'm very excited to get some testing done after I max it. But even up to 20, Ampu's fantastic. I've talked a lot about this champ. I did a video on him recently, and I'm going to take a little bit of the credit for the fact that he's starting to bleed into the arena meta because I was doing that. That's what my video was about. So Ampu's just crazy, crazy good. And I'm kind of glad that he's getting some shine now, because I think initially there was a lot of testing done on its damage, and when he wasn't doing the damage Daniel was doing, he was getting written off, and that's not right, because Ampu's crazy, crazy good. All right, so well into the S tier. I've got him a little bit more to the left because of the damage capability, but he's definitely more support than damage, okay? But either way, no matter how you swing it, killer champ. At a time where I thought my account was beyond getting a new champ and breaking through a bunch of walls, Ampu did that. I climbed 2 full chapters in the story. I think I'm in 49 now. I think it's 49 I'm in. 2 or 3 full chapters in the story. At least 10 more stages in Soul Mine, where I had been hard stuck for a long time. I'm still cruising through Faction Soul Mine because of Ampu. I was climbing back up into the top 8 every day in Arena after I would do my 5 battles. I was at least top 8, usually somewhere between top 4 and top 8. And I think today I'm a little bit higher, but I tried some different things, so I didn't win as many fights. And then my defense, when I log in and check my battle history, it's almost, for days, it was all blue. My defense was never losing. It was crazy how much he changed my account. So again, at a time where I kind of thought I had hit that point where it was just going to be a matter of making some small adjustments and improvements here and there and slowly creeping up a level or 2, that's kind of where I thought we had gotten with my account. And then Ampu opened up all the doors. So crazy good champ. Glad he's finally getting some shine. Definitely worthy of an S tier ranking, in my opinion. So there's that. I've talked about why Masrani's here. I think, honestly, he probably needs to just be here and toe the line between, I mean, maybe slightly under Serena, but because she is a better healer than he is. I mean, she's kind of if we're just talking heals. So maybe that's a little bit more reasonable. Masrani, though, I mean, I'll take Masrani over Serena every day, honestly. Because of the other things that Masrani brings to the battle, I'll take him over Serena any day. Serena is a better healer, for sure. No one is coming close to touching Serena's healing capabilities. But Masrani can do enough healing to be your lone healer, and the doubling the backline's attack and the shields and all the other stuff he's bringing that you can work with, I think are just hard to rival. So Serena is definitely still usable. When you want to run 2 healers, these are your 2 healers. When you're running Altar and you need a healer for another team, they can both solo heal. right? Serena's certainly got her place in the game, certainly has her usage. But if I'm only picking one, I'm going Masrani every time because he's insane. Insane, all right? Lower S tier, we've got Rez. I think the accessibility of Rez and the fact that immediately when you get Rez, he's usable. There is no evolution necessary. This second Rez enters your account, he's usable, and the effect is hard to match when we're talking about champs just immediately making an impact without needing anything. You get him on a decent gear, light gap set even better, and he at purple. Looking just like this Skewer and Hattie right here. Crazy good. Crazy good. One of my older videos on Kinsara Marsh talked about how I was farming 15 with only one damage dealer, which was Ravenna. And it was because I was using Rez to, pump steroids into her for the whole fight. So she was basically doing the job of more than one damage dealer. But it was because of Rez. He's just crazy. He's going to open up quite a few things for you. I've seen him used very heavily in Arena. He's great in certain situations in PvE. There are certain storyline chapters that I broke through specifically because I had Rez. I needed the extra power for my Ravenna to wipe out a lot of the minions when the minions are getting summoned, or certain enemies that weren't dying quick enough and were causing us a big problem. Rez enables my damage dealers to get them out of there quicker. So Rez has some very necessary usage, but then also just widespread utility. You can drop Rez into just about any team and notice a change. So Rez is definitely worthy of that S tier ranking. And again, the fact that as soon as you can get a copy of Rez, you're good to go is crazy. And then it's only going to get better over time as you're able to get more talents and exclusives and all of those things. But straight out of the gate, Rez is ready to roll. So S tier, easy in my opinion. Anaruda, talked a little bit about Anaruda. I've heard great things. I have not gotten to really see them yet or experience them yet. But I think the fact that you need a maxed out Anaruda with an EX30 weapon, especially given the fact that there's just other champs you need to EX30 first, right? You need to hit Masrani. Serena's definitely worth it. Daniel's in the conversation. For me, I hit Ravenna. Bailey needs it. Creed, Leo. You've got other champs that you're just going to EX30 first. I think for the waiting that you're going to have to do before Anaruda truly gets to shine for you, hard for me to rank Anaruda real high just yet. But based on what I've heard, I still think like a mid A tier ranking is pretty solid. We'll adjust this over time as we get to do more testing, all right? Hypnos. Low A, I think is fair. I think a couple of months ago, I might have even put Hypnos a little bit higher than this. Hypnos, I still don't think it's getting the appreciation I think he deserves. He's real good. He's another example of a champ that I got through certain parts of this game because I had Hypnos and I invested in him. He locked down certain champs that were causing me problems in certain story stages in Twilight or Soul Mine stages. Excuse me. It can be used very effectively in Arena. I have done some very interesting things with Hypnos in Arena. Maybe doesn't have the widespread utility like a lot of the other champs do, and maybe that hurts the ranking a little bit. But I think by no stretch of the imagination is Hypnos a bad champ. Hypnos is very usable and has a handful of things he's good at and does them very well. So perhaps is going to get bullied down a little bit more in time. I think Ampu is possibly negating any need. I'm trying to think of a reason I would use Hypnos now over Ampu. Maybe if I need to try to focus a specific champ very quickly, Hypnos is good for that. I don't know. We'll see how this evolves over time. We'll see what kind of adjustments get made to this over time. But for now, I'm pretty happy with that. And then Sorvali, I guess is how you say it. I don't have a lot of experience with her yet by herself. I know that with Ampu, they're a fantastic duo. But in much the way that Na Fang, I can't really give Na Fang a great rating because it seems like all he does right now is buff Leo. Maybe I'll feel differently after I do a little bit more testing. Her kit seems really good on paper. And again, maybe I just haven't seen a little bit much. So it's somewhat inconclusive, and somewhat, I think, the fact that she relies on Ampu to fit into anything that could be considered meta. I think I have to put her a little bit low right now. But again, maybe we'll do more testing and that'll change over time. Serena, I've talked a little bit about. Just no one can touch Serena's healing capabilities. I have her, I think, on full HP, and I have Masrani on abundant, and he still can't heal like she heals. So she's just crazy, man. She's just crazy good heals. Bada, I have not done a ton with, so again, maybe kind of a little bit inconclusive. The experience I've had with Bada is solid. Seems like a decent healer. Better than Liren, I think. Liren's also solid, though. This is still B tier. Liren's still in B tier, so it's not that I think Liren is a bad healer. I just think maybe of the healers we have the worst. Which again is not a bad thing. Not bad that Serena and Masrani are so far above you know what I mean? So that's kind of how I feel about the healers. And that's it. That's what I got so far. That's my thought process. We will probably continue to come in here and make adjustments to this over time. I'm not completely shut off to feedback. If there's anything that y'all thinking is criminal in here, let me know and I'll give it some thought. But you're gonna have to make a case for it. You can't just be like, you're wrong about this, change it. I'm gonna need some, I'm gonna need some follow up on your opinion if you want me to consider, what you think. So leave me some comments. Let me know what you think about it all. We'll make some adjustments over time as I get to do more testing and as we get more new champs. But it's nice to have the foundation of it laid so I can come in here and play around with it. It's hard to like motivate yourself to dedicate the time that it takes to do something like this. But now that the foundation's laid, I can come in here and make tweaks as I see fit. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's been pretty heavily requested. I know it's a pretty long video. I think subsequent videos for the tier list won't be as long because I won't have to go through and explain every single champ and why they're the way they are. I'll just explain any changes and any updates that we make. So that's it. I'm very, very curious to see what kind of feedback we get on this one. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you